I'm not going to do a long bio of Tom Fitton. I encourage you to go to judicialwatch.org, read about their organization. I'm just going to say a couple of things that might ring a bell. Benghazi, Hillary Clinton emails, Lewis Lerner and the IRS. Right now, the Comey records. They have a lawsuit trying to get hold of those records that keep leaking to the press but don't seem to be anywhere else. That is what the kind of things they work on. They are the arm that tries to keep government open and accountable and transparent. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, Mike, how are you? I see my friends, Mr. The Meadows and Mr. Farris. Thank you, everyone. I just got here, so forgive me if I'm a little discombobulated. But it's an honor to be here. And, you know, it's a great testament to our American values and the rule of law that we're able to come together here today. Because you think this happens all over the world where organizations, civic organizations get together and talk about what they're going to do to organize and how they're going to monitor the government and affect public policy. Well, you know what? It isn't allowed in most other places in the world. Even the nonprofit sector, as we know it in terms of public policy, doesn't exist anywhere else. And if it does, it's just they're tools of the government, or the tools of a political party, or they just aren't allowed to exist. And people like us would be operating in fear for our lives and in fear for our prison. So God bless America is what I have to say when it comes to organizations like Civitas. It's such a precious, precious right we have. And I'm so happy to see that outside of Washington, D.C., we still maintain this Founding Fathers' values of eternal vigilance in terms of protecting our liberty and our rights here. Now, we're facing a crisis here in Washington, D.C., and I thought it would abate with the new election, but obviously this president wasn't going to give us any breathing room. But it isn't the president that's causing the problem. We're in kind of a revolutionary period created by the progressive left. They want to upend the country as we know it, and they're breaking the rules in order to do that. And we saw that during the Obama administration, and we're still seeing it during the Obama administration because in many ways the Trump administration is yet to come to power. The good news is that people are upset about it, and I've often joked I go to the Church of Our Lady of Perpetual Outrage. And it used to be the pews were not as full as I like them to be, but now, you know, the bishop is in the presidency, it looks like. And that is why the left is acting as the way they are towards him. The crisis we face is one of a government that doesn't feel like it's accountable, a bureaucracy that doesn't feel like it's accountable, a legislative branch that doesn't want to do the things that the Constitution envisioned it doing in terms of oversight and providing a check and a check on the government and a voice for the American people in the operations of government. Right now, and I'm sure Chairman Meadows will discuss later, you know, they're planning to vote on a $1 trillion spending program for our government. Probably will happen over the course of 3 days. You know, that isn't really oversight. That isn't legislating. And then the agencies get the money, and they don't want to tell you what they're up to. And up until now, we've had a President Obama, for instance, didn't think he was answerable to the Constitution. It was the catch me if you can presidency. And the crisis is we have these elections, right? We have votes. They're counted more or less. And politicians can lose and win. But if they get to Washington and they spend money without thinking about it, and our president doesn't think he's answerable to the Constitution, and the agencies of government aren't accountable to the American people, and we have a judiciary that's largely out of control as well, is that self-government? Is that a Republican form of government? I think not. I think not. But there is hope. Judicial Watch. and I say this objectively speaking, of course, but we have conducted the most significant non-governmental investigations, frankly, in recent American history, if not. We uncovered the Clinton emails. We uncovered key information about Benghazi, tying the White House to the big lies about Benghazi, leading to the creation of Select Committee. The FBI followed our lead in terms of the criminal investigation or matter of Hillary Clinton. And certainly, Mrs. Clinton wasn't indicted officially, but there was a measure of accountability on Election Day, and certainly if the voters were sitting as a grand jury, you know what their verdict was on Election Day. And we didn't do it because I didn't know Hillary Clinton was going to run for office. But we did it because we had a right to these records under the law, and Mrs. Clinton thought she was above the law. She came into office immediately, and despite warnings from security people in the State Department, she thought she was going to do all of her business in private, and we know what she was trying to cover up. And she knew what the laws were. She knew what FOIA was. She knew what the requirements were for keeping your emails. She knew what the requirements were for classified information. But she thought she was going to get away with it. And she thought if anyone had to get her emails, they were going to have to go through her lawyer well after she was president of the United States. Well, it turned out very differently for her, didn't it? And everyone thinks she's out of the woods yet, I think, is naive. I think the reason she's not out of the woods yet is the vociferous attacks on the president. It shows you that they are very nervous that if things settle down and the law enforcement focus became regular, someone like Hillary Clinton would still be facing significant criminal liability. And I say, yeah, I don't know, is that on the White House wall? You know, there's this famous wall in Bannon's office where he has a list of all the president's promises, and I don't know, is locker up on that list? And so the reaction to the loss, you know, the criminal class in many ways lost on Election Day last year. And the reaction to that is to, again, abuse the powers of government to go after the duly elected president of the United States. So they created what I call the unicorn theory of the election, that the Russians somehow hacked the election and Donald Trump was in collusion with the Russians, ignoring the fact that the only specific information we had about foreign money going into someone's personal coffers was related to Mrs. Clinton, for which she still needs investigation. And because the hardcore left controls the levers of government and the media, they were able to create this scenario where the president would be facing criminal liability and potential impeachment. And if they can't get him, they'll get his family. And believe me, if we thought a president, Republican, had done anything wrong, we'd be first out of the gate saying, hey, there needs to be an investigation, there needs to be an independent investigation, there should be consideration of impeachment, congressional hearings and such. But it's obvious nothing went on. It's obvious. So we're facing this crisis where they're breaking the rules, illegally leaking. Devin Nunes, one of the few members of the House who is kind of a whistleblower because he figured out by reviewing materials at the White House, intelligence materials, that the Obama gang was unmasking and spying on individual citizens in arguably an unlawful way. And of course, they were leaking classified information and violating the privacy of those citizens. So does anyone think that a president who would allow his IRS to target his political enemies and suppress an entire political movement against him would think twice about using the intelligence apparatus to spy on these same individuals and people? And political opposition both in his party and outside his party? Of course not. Let me say one thing about the FBI and Robert Mueller's FBI. One of the things we uncovered in investigating the IRS scandal again, getting documents Congress couldn't get and the media didn't want to get, was that the Justice Department was working with Lois Lerner's FBI to try to prosecute the very groups that that Lois Lerner was suppressing through the IRS. And I say Lois Lerner just as an easy way of remembering, but the Democrats in Congress wanted that done, and Barack Obama wanted that done as well. So just think about this. The Justice Department and the FBI, under Robert Mueller, were concocting ways to prosecute President Obama's political opposition. And once they were caught, they had to turn over 1.5 million pages of IRS documents they had unlawfully obtained from the IRS, and you remember gathering that information. And so this is the man that we're trusting to honestly evaluate misconduct in government. Is he going to evaluate what the FBI was up to in terms of this unmasking and intelligence gathering? Obviously not. So that's the crisis we face. But as I said earlier, there's an answer. There's Judicial Watch. And it's not Judicial Watch per se, although I do mean that in part. But it's the approach. It's the approach that government's answerable to us. We can't rely on the politicians to do our work. We can't rely on the organs of government to police themselves. We have to take advantage of the precious right I talked about that our wonderful laws allow to provide oversight and accountability for the government. And so when we're in court, and I'm not a lawyer, but our lawyers are in court on behalf of Judicial Watch or our clients or such, the IRS has to answer to us. They have to answer to the court. We're on equal footing, more or less. Now, I'm not naive. The government gets a lot of deference they don't deserve because it's the government. But we get documents in the end. They have to tell us when they're going to give us the documents, what are they going to withhold, and then justify it all. Hillary Clinton had to answer questions under oath over her misconduct in the FOIA context to Judicial Watch. One of the most significant people in the world at the time, Hillary Clinton running for president, had to submit to answers. We wanted to depose her in person, but again, there's that deference. But she had to answer questions under oath to us. And of course, we were able to get the emails that she didn't want us to see. Isn't that remarkable? So this effort for transparency and using the courts effectively, but demanding accountability, because the government's really out of control, and it's one way to bring the government back down under control. Because I tell you, if we hadn't done the Clinton email matter, if we hadn't done those investigations, if we hadn't been persistent and consistent, we'd be talking about a very different presidency right now. We'd be talking about a very different presidency. We'd still be it would be just a different type of crisis, but it'd be a very different one and much more significant. And that's why it's important that that we just don't give up. Little old Judicial Watch was just asking questions. We didn't know about Hillary Clinton's emails, but we knew she was probably no good, and we asked the right questions about what she was up to. And just by way of background, we were getting these big Benghazi documents I was telling you about. We noticed that she didn't have any emails. And I was, talking in the office, like, where are her emails? I'm thinking, well, maybe she didn't have any emails. Maybe the email issue had she was first lady, she was a senator, she ran for president. Maybe emails were not in her thing. Well, but rather than just guessing that maybe she didn't send emails and just leaving it at that, we asked again. Where are the emails? She didn't have any emails? And they got back to us at the end of 2014 and said, well, you know what, we got some other stuff we need to look at. And then in the beginning of 2015, they told the court, we gave Judicial Watch everything, but there are some other documents we need to look at. 3 weeks later, it appears in the New York Times she had this email issue. And there's no doubt, and it's been confirmed by the FBI, that the FOIA forced this issue out. So there's this wonderful tool available to us, and it's available to you at the state level as well. Often FOIA is stronger, or the state versions of FOIA are stronger at the state level than at the federal level, meaning that it gives you more access to documents and less reasons for the court, for the government to withhold information. And I tell you what, send a Freedom of Information Act request to the school board, or your local mayor or town councilman. They don't get too many of them, and you'll get their attention. So there's a lot of things that need to be done in terms of, and I've told the White House this, their approach should be extreme transparency. Let it all out on the Obama gang, what they did on Hillary and such. And let it all out on Russia. Let it all out on what they're doing. Otherwise, you're going to have the deep state reading memos selectively to the media, and the American people aren't going to see what the real truth is. And I think that's what they would want to do, but as you can see, the president may want something, but his agencies don't want to do what he wants. And so that's the conundrum we're facing. So Judicial Watch is obviously going to be monitoring what the administration is doing in the traditional sense, their policies, and making sure they're doing things right. But then there's this other government that we'll have to monitor, the deep state, as I call it, because they don't want to do what the president wants. The bureaucrats in Washington don't like Republicans. One of my colleagues who used to work in government, he made the point, if you work in government for 30 years, it tells you something. For instance, if you work in McDonald's for 30 years, it's presumed you kind of like McDonald's. If you work in government for 30 years, I think we can make certain presumptions about where the bureaucrats' values lie. So they don't like Republicans, they don't like conservatives, and they hate Donald Trump. So all bets are off, the rules don't apply. Our motto is, no one is above the law. The mirror of that is, no one is beneath the law. And just because this president is controversial, or sends out tweets that makes other politicians uncomfortable, or says or does things that makes all of us uncomfortable sometimes, doesn't mean he doesn't deserve the rights due to any other president, and the protections under law due to any other U.S. citizen. And it doesn't mean the FBI and the CIA and the NSA can start spying on him just because they think he's unfit to be president. And it doesn't mean they can start leaking stuff because they're angry and begin a criminal prosecution because one of their guys got fired, and turning an employment dispute into a criminal matter. This is a rule of law crisis, and it's not caused by the president, it's caused by his opposition, frankly, that are abusing the powers of government that they've been entrusted with. So as we understand that, it gives us the way to think about it and talk about it, but understand that it's a crisis, because we can talk about public policy, but if we're removing presidents unlawfully, that's kind of pro forma sort of stuff, relatively speaking. And I'll just briefly talk about the issue of election integrity, because North Carolina has been on the front lines here. You've been undermined by your own governor. You've been attacked by the Justice Department. You've been attacked by the left for just wanting to ensure that the people who are voting lawfully, and not more than once. Everyone agrees that voter ID is necessary. You do the polling at 70, 80%. You do, but the other crisis is, and of course the left doesn't want voter ID. The other cutting edge issue is certifying that someone is actually a citizen before they register or vote. Why would anyone be opposed to that? Why are they opposed to it? Because the left wants to be able to steal elections if necessary, and election integrity measures get in the way of doing that. And they play the race card, which is a false one. It's really malicious and false, because they know. If you want minority turnout to increase, you ensure the integrity and strengthen the integrity of elections. That's what the data shows. That's what North Carolina's data shows. Because unlike the left, we don't patronize minorities. We don't think voter ID is too difficult to get or too difficult for them to figure out because they're minorities, but that's what the government under President Obama suggested through his Justice Department expert in North Carolina's litigation. You spent tens of thousands of dollars with an expert saying that minorities weren't smart enough to figure out to get voter ID. That's outrageous. And of course, who's most affected by voter fraud? The demographics of the poor, right. The big cities and such. And if they think their votes aren't going to count, you think they're going to come out and vote? Of course not. They're not stupid, nor would I expect them to come out and vote if their votes aren't going to count. But if there's more election integrity, voter ID, and they realize their votes will count and matter, turnout increases. So you should stand strong and hold your heads high in protecting voter integrity, because it's a cutting-edge issue. The left is spending tens of millions of dollars in resources on this, and I can think of 2 or 3 groups on the right, including Judicial Watch, that is fighting against this. And the Justice Department, there's no one in the Justice Department yet that we can talk to. So they're not really on top of this yet. But it's a real crisis. And again, we can talk about cutting taxes and, have all these discussions about what we're going to do in office. But if elections can be stolen, that's all for naught, isn't it? So it's a primary issue for the left, and I suggest it ought to be a primary issue for the right. So to the degree that you can reinvigorate North Carolina's election integrity measures through your activism and efforts with members of your state legislature and the governorship and the attorney general and such, you should. Because that's stealing democracy if you allow your votes to be stolen. We've done studies. The law requires that states clean up the rolls. Clean up the rolls. Imagine that. Make sure no dead people are on the rolls. Where someone isn't registered in 2 places at once, either in the same state or in different states. Take reasonable steps. Well, guess what? You think the states are taking reasonable steps to clean up the rolls? No. We've done an analysis recently. In 11 states, they have many counties where they have more people on the rolls than live there and are eligible to vote. So that's a pretty good indication they're not cleaning up the rolls, if they got more people on the rolls than live there. We just figured out in Los Angeles County, they have 140% of their voters are on the rolls. So the next time you hear the media deride the president's concern about illegal voting, think of that 140% figure. Or 11 states where you have more people on the rolls than are eligible to vote. So my guess is, put a number on it, there were probably about 1 million illegal votes. I won't go into the details as to why I guess that. But looking at the data and looking at studies that have analyzed the likelihood of illegal alien voting, I don't mean illegal aliens voting, I mean aliens who illegally vote, both legally present aliens and unlawfully present aliens. About 1%. So about 1 million votes. And they tend to vote 80% Democrat. So the bad news is Republicans get illegal votes too. But this ought to be a priority issue. And the left, if they don't like the electorate, they want to remove it and replace it. And if it means allowing illegal aliens to vote or aliens to vote, they'll be willing to do that. So Judicial Watch is doing all of this work. We're trying to figure out what the government's up to. We're suing the government where appropriate. We're trying to protect election integrity. So we're in court on that. We sue states to get them to clean up the rolls. We've been defending North Carolina in amicus briefs here. And of course, we're going to be pursuing accountability over in the current crisis related to the president's issues with Russia. Well, he doesn't have issues with Russia, issues with the deep state. These are the things we need to be talking about. Because frankly, if Hillary Clinton were elected president, there probably would be a corporate tax cut. It probably cost us more on the back end than it would under a Republican, but there would be a corporate tax cut. There probably would be reform of Obamacare, even if Hillary Clinton were elected president. And I would suggest the president needs to spend his political capital on cleaning up Washington, because that would never have happened under Hillary Clinton. Cutting the heck out of the agencies, dropping the agencies down 20, 30%, firing everyone hired the last not only 8 but 10 years, getting that basic control back to the American people by downsizing government dramatically and reforming the way it operates. That's the crisis he needs to address. because Congress is going to muddle along on these other issues I talked about. But we need presidential leadership there. So with that being said, I want to leave a few minutes open for questions, but thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for your support of Judicial Watch. I know a lot of you support us, and we can't do it without you. Unlike the left, we don't get bulk money from George Soros, who gets bulk money from taxpayers we uncovered, or bulk money from one or two foundations. We're widely supported. We're a 500,000 strong grassroots organization. And again, a testament to the greatness of this country. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
The lawyers that cleared the emails off of Hillary Clinton, were they cleared for classified to handle classified information? And can they be prosecuted if they're not cleared to handle that classified?
Her personal lawyers.
Yes, the personal email.
I think that's a fair question. The question is, everyone who saw Hillary's emails, were there security issues with some of the people who saw stuff they shouldn't have? I would suggest there is, but Director Comey, he obviously didn't understand the law. You want to know why he walked away with the documents? He said Hillary could walk away with the documents. He said he didn't care about how those records were handled. Surprise, surprise, he walked away with documents as well. But I think we need if I were the president, I would order the Justice Department to audit the Justice Department's prior handling of the Clinton matter so that they can figure out whether they need to reopen or reinvigorate other investigations, because this prior Justice Department obviously was compromised through and through.
You segued beautifully to my question. Thank you for being here. I'm curious about an analysis of Mike Rogers' intelligence report and the so-called ARB from Mullen and Pickering. If they never knew about Hillary emails, were they fraudulent reports? Is there anything to be gleaned from the fact they never asked for emails or discovered that there was a server?
Yeah, it shows you that the questioner is referencing the official investigations into the Benghazi matter that really got us nowhere. And they didn't have access to Mrs. Clinton's emails. For instance, one of the things we're fighting now is a document about what Mrs. Clinton and Barack Obama talked about the night of the attack. That email's there. You can bet they never saw that. Or the document about what President Obama told foreign leaders the night of the attack, or the day after the attack. And what's troubling is, on these transparency issues, the administration hasn't changed one whit their legal positions. Not one change. In fact, it's gotten worse. So President Trump, I'm hoping he ain't running the show in that regard. But it's a real problem, because not only is not the Clinton material coming out, but you don't have the Russia stuff coming out either, because the agencies are pretending to be able to tell the president and the American people what it is they can't and can't see, and it's not right. Yes, in the back there. Well, FOIA doesn't allow us to get your documents, and doesn't allow us to get the DNC documents. It allows us to get taxpayer-funded documents, government documents. But your analysis is largely right, and we've asked questions about that, and I think we're going to sue if we don't get any answers soon on it. So that whole intelligence analysis of what Russia did and didn't do, and I suspect Russia did bad things, but the idea that they wanted just to support the president is so, is this what we're paying our intelligence community to figure out? Why did the Russians know that Donald Trump was going to win? Because Donald Trump didn't know he was going to win. I presumed, to the degree they were involved in leaking anything to make Hillary Clinton look bad, they were trying to put her back on her heels as she came into the presidency. And why didn't the intelligence community take that analysis into account rather than the politicized analysis that they were in it to help Trump?
First, thank you for what you do. I always feel good if I send you a check.
Thank you. And I feel good about getting checks.
And I'm sure you do.
It really makes our work so much easier.
Well, I'm curious about the DOJ and election integrity. When are we going to get to the level where those jobs are going to get filled or new leaders are going to be placed? And what's your plan? Who would you push to be in that position?
Well, they got good people at leadership levels, but it's always a struggle. You know, you always want people to think like you do in their approach. But there's got to, you know, I have to say, if the president took the Judicial Watch approach to governance, we'd be a lot better off. Sort of an aggressive, innovative, questioning first principles. Why is this agency doing this? Why aren't we doing that? The sorts of innovative things you would expect a reform president to do. And there aren't many people who think like us. I mean, otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be able to accomplish what we're doing, or it'd be old hat because everyone else is doing it. It's a real problem. We can nudge them along a little bit, but I mean, I don't have a good answer for you. Yes.
Thank you for all that you do. You're a patriot, and thank you for maintaining accountability.
Thank
It's
you.
much needed. Regarding Mueller and all the conflicts of interest, you know, the obvious, you know, just blatant conflicts of interest regarding he and his relationship with Comey, and there's a whole list, as I'm sure you're well aware of. What's the likelihood that he's going to be removed?
I don't think it's an insignificant likelihood. I mean, if I were Mueller, would be, let's say Mueller is a good guy, okay? I'd say, I'm done. Comey, you ruined it for yourself here. You got me appointed. I don't know if the guy who appointed me knew what you were up to when you took these documents to get me appointed, and I'm done. You may have a special counsel, but I'm not going to be involved in it because you have tainted my coming in to do what I thought was the patriotic thing to do, which was to settle this issue on behalf of the American people through the Department of Justice. That's what I would advise Mr. Mueller to do. Step away. And my view is the special counsel position is constitutionally suspect. Typically, a U.S. attorney, the rules read he has the powers of a U.S. attorney. A U.S. attorney is confirmed by the United States Senate. And line prosecutors receive day-to-day supervision in any powers they exercise. This Mr. Mueller, and it's not him personally, the special counsel position doesn't get the day-to-day supervision. At best, the agency head could come in later, or the appointee could come in later and say, well, I don't want you to do what you just did, assuming he finds out about it. That's no way to run a railroad. It's unaccountable government. And the president, or Mr. Sessions, should take another look at these regulations, recognize their unconstitutionality, and go back to square one if necessary. And I understand the politics of doing that, but the Constitution should trump the politics.
And last question.
How open is the president to talking to you, to conservative leaders and things like that, and actually taking their advice?
I think the president is very open to these issues. He is not being well served by, he's virtually alone in my view. He's virtually alone in trying to get everything done. Even the people that you would think would be helping him are ill-equipped to do it, or are so torn in so many directions they can't focus to do it. Just look at the Russia issue, how it's metastasized. Clearly, no one understands the gravity of what he was facing, and the president is frustrated and tweets the way he does because I think he alone understands it. And I've asked, for instance, the Speaker of the House, why hasn't the House been out defending the president from these lawless attacks? And the response is they have a committee looking into it. He has no help. He really has no help. And there are people who want to help him, but who are unable to for various reasons within the White House and within the agencies. So the ship of state is big, and it's a lonely position in terms of what because of his outlook and because of the threats he's facing. The Washington establishment is oblivious to it. Well, on that happy note, but we're not oblivious to it, and I do think the president is the one who can take, he fired Comey. He fired Comey. You can argue when he should have fired him, but he did it, and he was right to do it, and Comey's behavior since then has confirmed the president was correct in firing Comey. And that is a sign that maybe the Judicial Watch approach to governance is taking hold a little bit. Thank you very much.